Testing? Okay. Well, welcome very much. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a very exciting panel, and I'd like to welcome you all to the room. We are all participants together, and your voices are as important as the panelists. So our group is going to be talking about women's role in peacemaking, and particularly from a religious angle. And we are here to be slightly, well, we'll be learning, we'll be provocative, and what we want is to actually come up with recommendations that the Interfaith 20 can send to the G20, and so help all our organizers here make this a very actionable panel. And so to start, we're going to have Lee, Professor Lee, set the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm local, so I have to say welcome to Cape Town. I know that it's Wednesday already. And I'm not just local, I'm hyper-local. I'm a Camisa African, and Camisa is another word that we use for Cape Town, and it means the place of it's our affectionate name for the city, the place of the sweet waters. So welcome to Cape Town, the place of the sweet waters, and the smoke that thunders, that is obviously Table Mountain, Hirikwahwa. So I work in the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice, and I teach religious studies at the University of the Western Cape. And today I'd just like to ground our discussion in a few provocations. And so I'm going to start with a question, and then a little bit of personal context. So my question is, if we already trust women to hold together the fragile piece of daily life, why do we not trust them to shape the peace of the world? So myself included here, across many African cultures, my own, the OC, or the OC, or the OSIS, the eldest sister, or the elder sister, embodies wisdom, patience, and persuasive authority. She is trusted to resolve disputes, maintain relationships, and protect the well-being of her community. This role reflects a broader truth. Women are already central to the maintenance of peace in daily life. Yet when conflict reaches national and international levels, this proven leadership is sidelined in favor of male-dominated negotiations and androcentric frameworks. Heteropatriarchy at its best. This exclusion is not accidental, it's systematic, intersecting with race, age, class, and global power dynamics. And it's compounded by the ongoing war on women's bodies through gender-based violence. And this is a particular issue in the South African context. In many conflict and post-conflict settings, and part of my provocation is that in the South African context, in this particular moment, we are in a conflict setting, and it's a conflict setting against women's bodies and those of marginalized persons, including marginalized men. In many conflict and post-conflict settings, women are targeted not only for their political positions, but simply for existing in female bodies, subjected to assault, exploitation, and silencing. If religion is to claim a role in peacekeeping, it must confront these realities head-on. What is the value of religious peace discourse if it does not address the violence waged against women's bodies? It is not enough to include women as an act of tokenism or to tick a diversity box. What is necessary is a fundamental shift to acknowledge all women's work and all of the work of women, to make intersectional, gendered, age-inclusive, racially aware leadership the norm, and to rely on women's leadership as central to all peace-building strategies, whether in times of conflict or not. Tokenism treats women's presence as symbolic. Real transformation treats their leadership as indispensable. In South Africa this month, August, is National Women's Month, and we commemorate the 9th of August, the 1956 march of more than 20,000 women who marched to the union buildings in Pretoria to protest the heinous pass laws. And this legacy is a reminder that women have always been at the forefront of struggles for justice, not just as supporters, but as leaders. The challenge before us is not merely to include women in peace building, but to confront the cultural, religious, and geopolitical structures that continue to invisibilize our labor. There can be no lasting peace of any kind while the labor, the leadership, and the bodies of women remain under siege. So those are my opening remarks, provocations. Thank you so much for being with us here, and thank you to our panelists. I think that we're going to have a wonderfully critical and creative conversation, and I will hand over to my co-chair.
Thank you, dear. So what we're going to do is have 5 minutes of presentations by each person, setting the stage for their role in this, and then we're going to have a few moderated questions. But during that time, I want you to also think of any questions that you have for this. And we will start with Babawa, Sohaira, and then Naila. Go this way. Oh, you have the mic, okay.
I thought you were going to start with the questions, so I don't have something to say other than
Yes.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Naila Tabbara. I come from Lebanon. And in Lebanon, I co-founded 19 years ago with friends and colleagues an organization that is called Adyan, which means religions in the plural. So for those of you who don't know, about the history of Lebanon, we lived a civil war in Lebanon where different religious communities and political parties were pitted against each other and fought each other. So our divides are across religious lines, but also across left-wing, right-wing political parties. And I didn't know it then, but I think this, having lived that in my childhood, is what also led me to be one of the founding members of this organization, Adyan, that wanted to create a space for people to meet, to change their perceptions about each other, but also to be able to share their narrative and their memory, their collective memory. Because what happened is after the war ended in Lebanon, we didn't have truth and reconciliation. What we had was the leaders of the war said, well, let's forget everything that happened, and they changed their militia suits to suits and ties and became members of government. And so we had to just turn the page without dealing with our pain, with our stories, with our loss. And each one remained having their own collective or groupal memory that is just partial memory and always loaded with emotion, loaded with suffering, loaded with fear from the others. And so for us, at least, it was very important to create a space where people can start hearing each other without responding directly and, oh, you're hurt by this from us? Well, you did this to us too. So hearing each other and acknowledging the pain of each other was something for us that can pave the way bit by bit to be able to build with each other, because there's no way to build when we haven't addressed all that pain and hurt. I will stop here to keep my 2 remaining minutes for another question.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to start with a somewhat jarring statistic that I read, which is in 2022, nearly 600 million women, about 15% of the world's female population, lived within 50 kilometers of armed conflict. That's 15% of the women's population. What's even more jarring is that number has doubled since the 1990s and continues to rise every single year. So in the face of this staggering reality, how do we meaningfully speak about women and peacemaking? In the 2024 Women, Peace and Security Index, it attempts to capture women's status through looking at a number of indicators across 3 dimensions: inclusion, justice, and security. The top performing countries are wealthy and politically stable. The lowest ranking countries are fragile or conflict-ridden. This tells us effectively what we already know. When political and economic systems collapse, women carry the weight. They carry the cost in displacement, in disempowerment, and the long-term structural inclusion from formal processes of peace and recovery. But women's absence from the peace table does not mean they are absent from peace building. It means potentially that our definitions themselves are too narrow of what peace building is. I come to you today as Executive Director of Al-Mujadilah, a women's mosque and center in Qatar, a country that we often know through the lens of geopolitical diplomacy and global mediation. But it is also a place that is deeply diverse, shaped by migration, class difference, and the moral weight of regional conflict, which we know all too well. Al-Mujadilah was founded less than 2 years ago with the aim of building an integrated, faith-rooted model of development specifically for Muslim women. One that sees them not simply as recipients of aid or policy, but as stewards of themselves, their families, and most importantly, their communities. In a short 18 months, we've hosted over 150 programs in multiple languages with over 4,000 participants, from long-standing residents to newly arrived refugees, young professionals to old caregivers. So what I want to do today is just share 3 quick insights from our work and examples of the types of programs that we've been doing. The first, and I think most important insight, is peace must be rooted in the value systems of those that seek it, something we've heard over and over again throughout this conference. In Muslim contexts, this means that peace must speak to and emerge from the Islamic tradition. At Mujadilah, our programs are anchored in this tradition, whether we're discussing financial literacy, family security, climate change, neocolonialism. The framing is not simply compatible with Islam, but it flows directly from it. And this makes the content not simply informative, but transformative. For example, our faith-based leadership program for young Muslim women, which is running as I speak, thinks about leadership not simply as women leading, but women as stewards, coming from an ethic of a prophetic model of leadership that is based in service, justice, mercy, and community. These young women are now beginning to serve as mentors, community organizers, and public leaders, not in spite of their faith, but fundamentally because of it. The second insight is that peace building cannot be left to political institutions alone, something I don't need to emphasize here, of course. Formal spaces remain androcentric and exclusionary. But third spaces, especially religious ones, can be reimagined more quickly as sites of meaningful civic formation. At Mujadilah, the mosque is not simply a sanctuary. It's a place of study, of dialogue, reflection, connection, especially for women who have otherwise been excluded. This was really evident most recently in our Tatriz embroidery class, which is a traditional Palestinian embroidery, which was led by displaced Palestinian women who are refugees currently in Qatar. It was a space of healing, storytelling, and intergenerational memory. Third, sustainable peace begins with the well-being of the peace builder themselves. We often ask women to rebuild fractured societies while overlooking their own wounds, and this is something our moderator just spoke about as well. But trauma, instability, and exclusion all take their toll, and healing must be part of any framework for lasting peace. And this is one of the reasons we run classes like Cultivating Resilience for Single Mothers, or financial literacy classes, or classes on displacement. What all these programs share is an approach that moves from the individual to the community and then to the societal. We build the self through religious grounding and education, and we build community through spaces of trust and belonging. And from there, we create the conditions for women to contribute meaningfully to their families, to their neighborhoods, and to peace. This is peace building, not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind that transforms lives from the inside out. It's slower and it's much quieter, but it's sustainable precisely because it is rooted in faith and in relationships. So as we gather to address the absence of women from formal peace processes, I urge us to shift our lens slightly. Peace does not only begin at the negotiation table. It begins in community, in classrooms, in women's circles, and crucially in prayer. and in the patient, faith-rooted work of building spaces where women can heal, thrive, and lead.
Yeah. I would give a round of applause for that. That was a brilliant reflection, and yeah, it's such an honor to be seated with people who are really living the work of being women in peace building. You know, when I really looked at this topic, I really thought this feels very convoluted because, you know, the idea of women in peace building and what is their role, it seems very obvious. Their role is and has been to do exactly what their male counterparts are doing, is to lead, is to follow, is to create, is to heal, to care, to speak, to write. It's all the things that males are capable of. And so for me, the more powerful question really has been, and as I was thinking through this topic, is just the idea of what has the role of woman been relegated to? And why has it been relegated to this role? And are we satisfied with that role? And if we are not satisfied, what are we doing to change that? I have the privilege of working for an organization that was founded by a woman. I work with the Charter for Compassion, and it was founded by Karen Armstrong, who wrote prolifically about comparative religion, who used this idea of compassion not just as a way to build peace, but as a way to seek justice and entrench justice, which is within every single institution, and particularly those that are religious. And what I love about the Charter as well as an organization is that it's been very intentional about the way that women are included within its structures, but also most importantly within its leadership. And so when you talk about representation, right, when we talk about tokenism, those are serious issues that we need to think about. I chuckled yesterday when we experienced the plenary. If anyone watched the plenary in the morning, there was a very important contribution around the lack of representation of women within these panels, within these spaces. And that's something that has cut across every single one of not just the panels that we see, but every single one of the smaller groups as well, right? I was in one yesterday that spoke about the challenges in Africa, and there was not a single woman. When women make up 50%, about 50% on average, more than 50 of individuals within Africa. And so we must ask ourselves then, why? Because I think we've answered the, are we satisfied? We're not satisfied because women's roles have been pushed a little bit into spaces that don't really honor their voices or value them. And I enjoyed the challenge that came from the stage, but I also asked myself, this individual himself is grandstanding on the stage, but why did he not bring that up before? Perhaps he did. But why did he not bring that up before the panel? And if he did and they pushed back, why did he not say, I will not participate in a panel where there is not a majority of women? And to go further than that, instead of saying, I might be the one to do it, maybe there is a woman who I know, who is a colleague, who is leading, who is doing this work, who too has a voice and should be sitting where I am sitting instead of me. And so what I really want us to focus on is the role of solidarity in enhancing and in lifting the value of women's work in peace building. Because the reality is that women are doing peace building. They are on the ground. They are taking care. They are educating. They are writing. They are sitting in this room. They are leading. But they are excluded. And exclusion isn't just a result of this thing that we call ignorance. It's sometimes not even a result of intentional sexism and misogyny. It really is a confluence of the cultural construction that we find ourselves in. It's a confluence of belief systems that often tell us that women's roles are to be seen and not necessarily to be heard. And so the role, I think, that faith communities, and it's one that I am very committed to working with, for example, the Cape Town Interfaith Initiative, working within the Charter, is how we shift our structures to ensure that women are supported in leading, women are supported in elevating their work, And women are not just tokens, but they are valuable members of the work of peace building.
Yes. I'm Sister NLS Chimbali from the Servants of the Blessed Virgin Mary Sisters in Malawi. When I listen to all this and when I contemplate, I always take me back to my academic circles. I have a little background of ICT. When a computer or your phone is not working, what do? You restart it. You reboot it. Okay. So when I look into all these peace building efforts, sustainability effort, the role of women, we need to redo the system. We need to redo the structure. Without that, we'll be talking and talking and talking because there is fear between among us women and also on the male circles. The more women who become too close, they feel uncomfortable. And with that, I just want to give you a little narrative. Something like, I'm a child born in Malawi from a matrilineal society where a woman can get inheritance or even the leadership of the community. But when it comes to choose a leader for that particular community, it's your brother. In my local language, we call Mwinimbumba a clan leader. Even that boy is 5 or 10 years younger than me, he becomes a leader. What does that mean? The other thing is I want to thank Conrad N. Hidden Foundation for the effort that they made for the Catholic Sisters Initiative Desk, for making sure that there is access for education for the Catholic sisters in Africa. They have done this for the past 10 years so that at least we as sisters, we can get qualifications so that maybe we can be recognized in different kind of circles, that we can do something apart from just being in the sacristy or in the kitchen preparing meals. And we need, as women ourselves, to take a broad step, especially when it comes to taking roles. There are very good example. If you look ourselves in this room, the majority of us are women. If it happened to choose a leader here, all of us will be looking at these men who are here to be our leader. What is our problem? And sometimes we can have resources, thanks to girl empowerment programs. We have a good number of girls who have been empowered. But what is happening in the society? We shun away. We give other people to take responsibility or to make decisions for us. When it comes to poverty, for me, poverty or peace has a face of a woman. There's no woman in this room, very few maybe, who can neglect their children and run away and leave them behind. We have seen that many men do that. When you look about immigration issues or migration issues, many people who are leaving their homes are men. And always women remain behind. What does that mean? The level of poverty is at a local household level. What should we do? I think we need to develop programs that can help women at a local level to stand for their rights, to stand for who they are, to stand for the responsibility that they have. Without that, we'll continue making noise and talking, but there will be no difference. Women, we should stop being the menu. We have been a menu for a long time. And everyone knows that women plays a bigger role for peace building. But what do we see? When it comes to discussion for peace building, my colleagues have already said, women are no longer there. Why? Because sometimes we use emotions and feelings when presenting our issues. We have to learn to present facts. Women population is high everywhere. When you go to the church, in Malawi in particular, you find the wing of the women is full, but the wing for men is just few. What does it say? When it comes to building of the church, women contribute a lot. Thanks to Pope Francis for recognizing Mary Magdalene as one of the apostles. it has taken over 2,000 years to recognize the role of this woman. What do we read about Mary Magdalene? You know all the stories that we read about her. But she is an important person in our scripture. Mary, Mother of Christ. God himself, when he wanted to save this world, he went through Mary to bring Jesus Christ in this community. So we as women, up until we take our responsibility right, there'll be peace in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, everybody. I share many of the sentiments that have been expressed, and particularly the frustration. I want to say, when I read that this was the topic and I was going to be speaking on this panel, I was filled with a huge amount of frustration because why are we still having this conversation? And I had to, yesterday I had a long conversation with a colleague in Uganda to ask her. She's an older woman than myself, and she's been fighting this fight for many years. And I said, Despina, why? Like, why are we still having this conversation? And her encouragement and support was really important in just like calming me down and bringing me here as well. And for that, I want to start by calling in and just inviting in all the women in all of our lives that have supported and helped get us to where we are. Because this conversation is often about the invisible voices, right? And I think it's important just for ourselves to acknowledge those voices and the people who have brought us where we are today. One of them for me is Sister Lucy Kurian, who is a Catholic nun in India who left the church because she realized the limitations that were in sort of the limitations of the institution that were placed on her in being able to enact change. In quite a dramatic incident, she left the church to start a home for women and children and has become this incredible mother of peace and love to thousands of children across India. And she's somebody who continually inspires me to do the work that I do. My name is Sarah, I'm from Cape Town, and I have the privilege of working with the United Religions Initiative, which is a global network of peacebuilding organizations and grassroots change makers. And it's why I feel this sense of frustration, because every day I have the privilege of seeing the most incredible examples of women peace leaders and peacemakers across the world. Just this week, there have been stories from our network from Uganda about efforts to support young girls in their education, to Australia, where there have been vigils against gender-based violence, to the Bedouin women in Jordan who are supporting one another. And all of these examples led me to the question of what is it leading to? And it's the question I want to bring to the panel today is what is that systematic change that all our efforts of peace building are leading to and changing? Because I think, as has been said, peacebuilding doesn't exist in a vacuum. We are in the social context and the world and the context of patriarchy that we all experienced. Yesterday's panel as the example. And so within that context, what are our efforts leading to in terms of systemic change? And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to explore some of that, because that's really the question we're trying to ask at URI as well, is like, we've got these great initiatives, but what, in different parts of the world, but what is it leading to, and what can we collectively do in supporting one another to make that change possible? So I'll just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
How can I not be nervous? Feeling all eyes on me at this point. First of all, I'm incredibly privileged to be sitting here with my colleagues. And I'm grateful to have been invited into now many spaces to sit with powerful women peace builders, including in my work. My name is James Patton. I've worked for about 25 years in development and peace building and have touched meaningfully about 35 to 40 countries in my work, including spaces that are exclusively spaces that are run by women or people of ethnicity that are not my own, places where I am an outsider, and I've been deeply privileged to be invited into those spaces. I think any peace-building practitioner recognizes all of the work being done by women, particularly as you get close to communities on both prevention and recovery side in particular, right? I mean, if you go down towards community-based organizations, they become more and more women-led and women-populated, including the ones that I've had the privilege to run. I ran the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy until last year for about 14 years when I stepped down. And our intern pool, our practitioner pool, particularly entry-level practitioners, were overwhelmingly women. Women work in the communities. And I want to address a little bit why that has not percolated up into some of the higher structures. But again, incredibly privileged to be here. I learned an interesting term yesterday, manel. We all knew what it was, I just didn't have a term for it. And there are, having worked in some of these spaces, I read manel, a panel of only men. Yeah. It is undeniable that groups who have similar life experiences, similar identities, need spaces to be together to share those experiences, right? And those need to be sacred and sometimes exclusive spaces. However, if there is one place where I would like to see the manelation of a space, it is in the discussion of the role of women in peace building. Those who are excluded don't need to be told that they're excluded. Why are there not more men on this panel saying we need to fix this problem? That's something that I continue to grapple with. So the irony is, of all the places where we maybe want more men on the panel, we don't necessarily have them. So that's something I'd like to see change. Now, again, peace practitioners see women in peace building. What we don't see is women at track one peace process tables, right? So I took this on as kind of the challenge when we were discussing this. Why? A quarter century ago, the world signed on to UN Resolution 1325. We acknowledged that this was important. A quarter century, and we are still having this conversation, right? Now, what's the reason? Obviously, there is sexism. Obviously, there is institutionalized exclusion. But I also think the question about peace processes and peace tables, and I just want to plant a seed because I know that my time is limited. But these tables are derived for what reason? To talk to those who have control over violence, to try to get them to negotiate power so that they stop using violence as power. I would suggest that the institutions around the use of violence and those who control the use of violence are overwhelmingly male-led, right? So as we talk about why we're bringing people together, even the best intentioned third-party peace builders who are putting peace tables together have a reductionist objective oftentimes, which is stop the violence. And stopping the violence means talking to the men with guns or the men who control the men with guns. That is an undeniable fact. There are women who shoot things, but many, many more men are shooting things. I mean, we just have to acknowledge that that is a tool that men use more than women. So we revert back to that even if we don't want to. What we need to do is we need to change the incentive structures around peace tables. Yes, ma'am. So very quickly, we need to change what we see as power, because women have power. We need to change what we see as legitimacy in a peace process so that we legitimize other things than the people who can stop pulling triggers. I have some structural suggestions on how to do that, but I guess I would just leave you with this question. What happens when we stop centering violent actors as the primary architects of peace? and instead design peace processes around these different sources of leverage and legitimacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, James, and we will come back to you for your ideas, those structured ideas. And we've heard a lot of different things already today. Solidarity from Babala, shifting structures. Sarah, how do we have collective system change? Sister Annalise, rebooting. I love the rebooting. But there is fear, and there's fear on the part of women and men. Dr. Sohaira, about starting with peace building, not peacekeeping. And I want to go back to Professor Nyla, who I did not give proper instructions to. And she still has 2 minutes left. And start with her, and then we'll open it to the floor. So again, be prepared. But what struck me in this conversation, and that's not really why I'm giving you the 2 minutes, but what struck me was when we talk about actors and moving forward in peace building, your little self, 19 years ago, started this on your own without an NGO or whatever. You started the NGO. So can you tell us a little bit more about, number one, what caused you to start that NGO? And I mean, in Lebanon's tough. It's got multiple religions, and it has a concessional government. It's like the worst complicated government, in many ways to work together. So do that, and then particularly about the networks you've built of men and women in that context. That's something Catherine Marshall mentioned to us. And I think if we're going to change anything, it's about creating networks when we push the reboot button. So over to you, Nyla.
Thank you. So we were 5 founding members, in fact, Muslims and Christians, and seeing the need to create something. And I think each one of us came from a different background. Of course, also women and men, 3 women, 2 men. And when we created also, Adyan, and why we created it and called it that, religions. This was in a post-war situation, and I was telling you the war, people were stopped at checkpoints and killed based on their religious belonging. And not only Muslim or Christian, but also the sect inside each. And so saying we want to call it Adyan was, for some people, are they bringing more sectarianism and onto the table? And we were saying no, but we need to learn how to speak about our different faiths. We need to learn how to speak about our belonging without it being overcoming the trauma from the war, and learn how to speak about the belonging. And saying that I belong to this community doesn't mean that I'm automatically against somebody from another community. So this started the discussion. And we wanted to create those spaces, especially through networks, so networks of youth, but also networks of religious leaders. And here, with the networks of religious leaders, of course, when we started around 20 years ago, these were purely male-dominated spaces, purely. With time now, we have 4 women pastors in Lebanon, but it took a lot of time. And so we started creating those spaces of male religious leaders and women, either community leaders or wa'idat or teachers of religion or sisters. And actually we had to create a word, because in Arabic, a religious leader is actually said religious man. So we created a word that says religious woman, that doesn't even exist, or an expression, and we started mainstreaming it in the media, because it's Nisa Din. And then we realized also that sometimes it is just that they're not used to. So when we're bringing muftis and bishops and putting them around the table with women, strong women from the community, or also, I mean, religious women, it's not that they like refused them, but they were just needed a bit of time to get used to it, and then bit by bit, they got used to the presence of women around these tables. And my next question, I will speak about women in the production of religious knowledge and interpretation, because this is where women are still generally very much marginalized, and where we need to do a lot of effort. So I will keep the 2 minutes for the next one, keeping the count.
Thank you. Some questions. Yeah. So can we have some questions from the floor?
So just some guidelines for the questions. Please introduce yourself and tell us who you are. Please keep the questions as short as possible so that we can take as many questions as possible. Thank you. We'll take a round of 3 questions, and then we'll hand back to the panel and move from there. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karika. I'm from Globe Ethics, and I'm the regional manager of the Southern African Center. I have a history of being an ordained minister back in the day and before working for Globe Ethics. And I remember being quoted in a newspaper, the local newspaper, saying, use women in church more than just at the cake table.
Good job.
And I think also Ubuntu has become the responsibility of, if we talk action, of women in Africa. And that's something that needs to be addressed. Men should also live Ubuntu if we are talking about this topic. So my question would be regarding peace building. And one of the things I started trying to do in my own life was looking at the role of language and the language we use as leaders regarding violence to bring about peace. And I taught myself not to use violent language. So I will never use the word fight, not even fight for justice. There will be resistance and similar kinds, but I think the language that we use can make a great impact. And as women, I think we need to take that responsibility as leaders also to teach that to our children, to our families, to our communities, to teach ourselves not to use words that are violent in itself. And as for your comment, James, perhaps, I don't think more men should be on the panel. I think more men should be in the audience listening to the women. Yes. Thank you very much.
At the back, and then we'll come to you in front. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Whitney Headland. I'm a master's student at Notre Dame in International Peace Studies right now in the US. And I had a question about how do we move from instrumentalizing women's role in peace building as tokenization and into meaningful participation? So in my institute, one of my colleagues wrote her thesis about instrumentalization of women's role in peace building, which has led for the cost of peace building to fall primarily on women. So meaning transportation to mediation sites or even just volunteering. And in my former life, I'm a USAID person. I've seen that firsthand quite a lot of using women as a token and using them as just, to have the numbers, but without any meaningful participation. So my question is, how do we move from instrumentalizing women's role, which is very important, into a meaningful way that doesn't just, check the box mark of we have women involved? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Whitney. And then one more. Just raise your hand again. Thank you. We'll come to you in the next round. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My name's Gabby Farber-Cohen. I'm part of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. And what has been going on in Israel and Gaza is nothing short of devastating. And it's created such divisions around the world. Wherever you see Muslim and Jewish communities, specifically in South Africa. There has been such a divide. There's this elephant in the room of tension, of pain, of wanting each other to recognize each other's pain. If you say one thing, the other group feels automatically attacked. If you say another, the other group feels they have to defend themselves. And I really, truly believe that the only way we can solve this is through women. And, you know, and it starts also in the outside world of partnership between the Jewish Muslim communities, because if we can't, as Jewish Muslim communities on the tip of Africa, be able to collaborate and talk and respect each other, then how are we going to hope that there is peace in between Israeli and Palestinian people in the Middle East? It starts here. So my question to all of you is, what do you think we can do here in South Africa to bridge the two communities together, and to create that bond at the end of the day? From a religious perspective, Muslim and Jewish people are cousins. We share the same father. And even if you look at the two religions, there's so much similarity, but there's become too much difference to even see that similarity.
Okay, thank you so much. So
I'm just going to say something about your last comment. I was lucky enough to be in the occupied Palestinian territory in around 2009, doing analysis, firstly of trade policy, and then secondly of women. And what I found, and really was I pretty naive about it, the news in the US is not so clear. I didn't even know as much about Northern Ireland, and I'm of Irish heritage, until I started listening to Al Jazeera. So, you know, news is news. So, but what I had is one-on-one conversations with women. And what I found was incredible solidarity and upsettedness about dividing into the zones, and this was before all this, and how unfair it was, and that, you know, Palestinian women would be delivering at checkpoints babies because they couldn't get through in time. But their Jewish neighbors felt equally for them, and they had been neighbors, they cared for each other. There was this love and solidarity that their neighborhoods had been broken up. And so I just want to say that voice of women and community and solidarity is so important in going to healing wounds. And sorry, I just had to say that just because that was part of my life experience. So maybe going back to our panelists to help answer that: language, instrumentalism, and then women working together.
So whoever wants to go first can just give a kind of response to those questions. I'm looking at you, James. Are you looking at me? Yeah, no, well, we made eye contact for your sins.
For my sins, which are many. First of all, let me just acknowledge, thank you for holding me accountable for skipping over something I think is obvious. And maybe this is part of the problem, is I think we all think it's obvious women need to be authentically leading on these issues. And I think it's obvious more men need to be listening. But I also do think, to go back to power, that until those who hold power willingly cede power, and that's what I meant by panelists up here saying, we need, as men who have power over these processes, to be telling others that it's time to cede that power. That's why I'd like to hear more men panelists saying, role of women in peace building is essential. But I do appreciate you calling me out for skipping over the most important part, which is listening. There's a lot here. Let me, and I'm sorry, to continue the thread of power, women have power in the communities. Women have been doing this work in incredibly essential ways on the prevention and recovery side, quietly. Everywhere I go, the deeper I go, it's the sisters, it's the indigenous women shamans, it's, the women are showing up. The men come when there's a public event, because in some ways that's also the role that they've taken and been given within these community spaces. But the community action is being done by women. To address the track one peace process issue, we need somehow to create structures where that power is equalized. And it's not just lay down the guns first and then go to the secondary piece, which is sustain and implement, right? And so to make those power structures change, we just need to re-envision what part of peace we legitimize, right? And how we think of peace beyond just setting the guns down. And that's not easy, because people will go back to the weapons as a way to reassert their power. So there are ways to do this, and to go back to the language question, I think this is fantastic, and I'm sorry to get hung up on the one comment, but it's a great reminder, and some of the structural ideas that I think would work are opt-in incentive ideas rather than punitive ideas, right? How do we reconceive of those who are making decisions about what peace should look like from the outset, based on the incentives they're given to sustain that, and making sure that the women's table, because you're going to have a table with the armed actors, there's no way around that, but then the women and other stakeholders have equal tables, that if there aren't agreements there, then the agreements with those who hold the weapons are not acceptable to third-party interveners or the group or whoever it might be. How do you incentivize that when it's not punitive incentives, but it's something that they get opt into some positive benefits, whether it's the impact of business, whether it's the impact of the multilateral space or third-party transnational actors. I'm still exploring this idea. It's more of a question than an answer. But how do we incentivize those who see themselves as holding the only lever of power, which is violence, to recognize that they can't benefit unless the others with other kinds of power also benefit, right? And I'm putting that out as a question because I've been struggling with this myself, and how not to just fall back into the fact that a bullet sometimes is the last word and sometimes is the strongest power. How do you disempower that? By empowering the things that we're talking about here. And it's an open question.
So I'm going to say, I feel in this room like the existential question of just using the word power is wrong. Somehow power feels like the opposite of what we're here for. And I understand where you're coming from, having lived in the multilateral forum and stuff like that. And one thing the W20 asks for is equal representation of women at the table, equal representation at the COP, peace building, etc. But if it's power, it's still not enough. It's really the faith community, to me, when I listen, is missing there. And so building a whole new incentive structure, the reboot I really like, because then it's a table of not just women, but it's of the faith that this is the moral thing to do, the right thing to do. And unless you give more weight to that, power is like the opposite to me. That's what I feel in my gut when I hear you say that. And I understand because I live in that world. And I'm trying to learn something new from where we are.
So just be... Oh, okay. No, I think we can just give you a second. Then just on what you're saying, and I think we'll move down the line with this. If we want to come back to faith communities, then we have to ask what is happening within, and I think maybe you were able to step in here as well. And all of those of you who are embodied or embedded in an actual faith community, like what does religion say about this? Right? What does religion say about women's work, about interfaith work? about how to theologically, and I mean, I'm not a theologian, so I always dread using, but it's important, right? Like, how is religion being interpreted? Because we know that religion has been systematically interpreted through hetero-patriarchal, white framings, right? That favor power and privilege and reinforce these structures. So maybe in responding now, if you can bring those real, those responses from what the traditions are saying and how do we work around that? Because we know, especially in South Africa, we know that religion played such an important role in creating the colonial and the apartheid systems that tore our society apart. Right? And we experience those legacies today still. We're struggling with those legacies, but religion played an equally and if not more important role in dismantling those systems. And so we know that, I think somebody said it on the first day, it's the medicine, it's the, it's the doctor, it's the medicine, but it's also the patient. So if you can speak to some of that for us in responding, that would be great. So we'll move down the line with Sarah, and then we'll come all the same kind of response, or the response to that, if you can include that in. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. I was actually just going to speak to that point in response to Whitney's question about meaningful participation, because I think it does start with us looking within and within our own faith communities. And I love the work that Dr. Sohaira and Prof. Naila are doing in terms of really putting that into action. I wanted to uplift here in South Africa the work of Safi and Elizabeth Peterson, who is working with religious leaders to equip religious leaders to be able to address domestic violence and gender-based violence within faith communities, because that's something that's not often spoken about. And it's a question of what are our systems within not just religious institutions, but organizationally as well, that are supporting women to even feel safe to get to the table, as it were. And I've asked myself this question in the organization that I work for, of what happens when you need to report somebody for sexual harassment? Are there safe processes in place for that to happen? And how are our organizations and religious institutions creating those procedures? I also, in terms of meaningful participation, I think our structures of support for women peace builders are so important. A colleague of mine just this week in India was working to support a community that's been impacted by floods. And she had to I was going to say fight, but now I'm like, she had to struggle to have menstrual pads put on the humanitarian list of donations. It was taken off because it was argued that it was too expensive, which again, pink tack, that's a whole nother thing. But she had to have the menstrual pads put on a humanitarian list for donations. And so how are we supporting one another as women in these spaces, and also to uplift the work of Jenny, who's sitting over there, and Euphrates Institute, who are creating sort of psychological support for women in Ukraine, peace builders who are under incredible kind of stress and burnout from the work that they are doing, and the work of Euphrates to create those spaces of solidarity and support, I think are really important. And finally, how are we approaching this conversation also with an intersectional lens, understanding positionalities, understanding all the levels of power and privilege that play into this, whether it be race, gender, sexuality. How are we supporting other struggles, and not just being sort of hypocritical in our call for women in positions of leadership, but understanding that runs across all marginalized communities and showing up in that way as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah mentioned two important people. So the first was Safi, South African Faith and Family Institute, and that's Elizabeth Peterson. So if you want to look her up. She also did her PhD at our research center at the University of the Western Cape, the Desmond Tutu Research Center. And then the second person was Jenny.
She's sitting over there.
Hi, Jenny, can you stand up and wave? That's Jenny. That's the other person doing amazing work. So go and find Jenny after this. Not all at once, though. Thank you so much, Sarah. Sister.
When I was listening to all this question, I was thinking we are all faith-based. there's so much pain around in our communities. And Africa is one of the continents that has suffered a lot of pain. The challenges, the healing processes are always ignored. And by being a faith community, we tend to hide behind prayer and faith. And we tend to ignore the realities. The differences that we go through every day sometimes are so painful that sometimes going to church to pray becomes questionable. Yesterday, when I was in another group, someone was saying, as church leaders, what kind of hope are we giving to our people? When you look at the violence, the killings that has happened in this world because of the religion, I think many people have died just because of that. And who are the people who have made this thing to happen? We are the faith-based community. And we are here discussing about peace. And God himself is peace. But if we kill the other, if we ignore the other person, is that the peace we are looking for? We have the role, all of us here. Whether we're at the table, we are at the menu, all of us, we have a role. We have to build the peace. We have to speak peace. In my organization, as All Africa Conference Sister to Sister, we always encourage the sisters in their own ministries to encourage peace-building words, non-violent words. And if we practice this, I think the children that we care, especially from the tender age, they will learn to live with each other in harmony. And we need to learn to break this silence. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. You think that?
Thank you. So just going back to what you were asking, what do religions say about this? So what we're arguing is that it's not what religions say, it's what we're making them say, because it's all in the interpretation. And that is why we need to reclaim interpretation. And one point I've been trying to make, because I worked on theology of diversity, Islamic theology of diversity. And generally, when we are seen as women theologians, we're just put in the corner of doing theology for women about women. And this has been the struggle, saying no, as men speak about so many other things like political theology, fundamental theology, women also speak and should speak and can speak about and write about these things. And even in religious leadership, there has been a lot of advancement in demanding the role of women in religious leadership. And in Islamic circles, for me, the most important is having women at the pulpit, having women speak the sermon. It doesn't matter if we're leading the prayer or not, because that's not... this is not where we hear the reflection of women, but we need women saying sermons. So, so this is about that part. I want to go back about what you mentioned about language, and for me personally, I will take what you said. But for me, and the thing that I've been living in my gut since Gaza, since it started, is that no, we need to fight, and we need to fight together. We need to fight for humanity. We need to fight for humanization. We need to fight for inclusivity. We need to fight for human rights. And honestly, I wanted to leave this maybe for the last question, but I don't think we will have time, so I'll say it now. I always had a problem with the word peace, and now I have even more problem with the word peace. I think what we need is justice. What we need is to, again, fight oppression. What we need is humanization and not peace. It seems like a concept that is so far-fetched, not of this world. Here, it's a constant struggle. It's a daily constant struggle. And I think, I mean, we can have inner peace. And working on ourselves to have inner peace in the struggle. So, but it is a constant struggle, and if we don't realize that we need to struggle every day, each one of us, and this is the question that you were saying, each one of us, we need to struggle every day for humanization, for human rights, and we need to be working together. So we need more voices like Jewish Voice for Peace, and those voices who are recognizing what has been happening to the Palestinian people, all the evil that has been done to the Palestinian people since 1948 and even before. We need to recognize this in order to build for the future together.
So every time I hear a comment, my brain goes in another direction. So I'm going to try to be coherent in my responses because there's 50 things I'm thinking about now. One of the most important things that we do at Mujadilah is think about education and public education for Muslim women. We start with the recognition that, yes, Muslim women are playing an incredibly important role in their societies, but we also recognize that there are still narratives that are preventing women from playing these roles, and that unless we as an organization take on those narratives in a very forward way, that we're not really addressing the full spectrum of the problem. And so what I mean by that is we're constantly trying to give women a theological education about what it means for them to be active civically in their communities. What does it mean for them to be active when it comes to peace, when it comes to working, when it comes to education, any one of the roles that they decide to play in their lives. And we baked this into the name of our center itself. So Mujadilah in the Arabic is taken from a surah in the Quran, and it translates into the woman who pleads or the woman who discourses. And it's about a woman who went to the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, after she was divorced by her husband, who felt it was an unjust form of divorce, and went to him to complain, to say that I think that this is wrong. And he was a very famous warrior, and the way the story goes is, the Prophet is silent, and she just stands there, and she says, I will wait until there is an answer. And revelation comes down and eventually says that the form of divorce that he gave was un-Islamic. And then there's, the story continues after that, but we find that a very important starting point for women, that women have always been on the side of what is just. And they have always been standing up for that, even in the case of going to the Prophet and asking for what they believed was the right solution. And so for us, having a very deep theological understanding and making sure that Muslim women understand their history is very important. And going to the question that Whitney asked about how to move beyond tokenization, one of the things that we think is really important is creating partnerships outside of simply civil society organizations. So for example, right now we're working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Qatar and with Georgetown University to design specifically a peacemaking course for Muslim women who are going to be negotiators at these tables. And the reason that we came up with this idea is because the Afghan-Taliban negotiations were happening in Qatar. And there was 2 female negotiators there. And, month after month after month, we would go and be part of these conversations. And you would see that the female negotiators would struggle because they didn't have the theological language to negotiate with the Taliban. They didn't have the legitimacy from the side of the government to negotiate. And we, as a small civil society organization, weren't giving them the legitimacy. It was just, it's a cute little women's mosque that's here helping the women. But right when you have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs step in and say, actually, these people have done a course and we are putting them on this table and you have to take them seriously, people start taking them seriously. And so I think the grassroots organizations are incredibly important. We have to continue to do the work. But as grassroots organizations, we also have to know when we need to step outside of grassroots and start engaging with governments, start engaging with other organizations, universities, to say, let's co-create things that will then be more legitimate in the community and can potentially move women away from just being tokens to actually having a formal seat at the table.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the question around language, and I'm going to have to agree with you. I think that it's very important that we call a spade, and it's very necessary for us to use language that pinpoints exactly what is happening. I think when we work in particularly the justice field, when you're working against violence, even when you're working with young children and you're teaching them about their bodies and how to protect them from bodily harm, you always use the word that is associated with the anatomy, right? We don't use simpler terms. We don't use sort of the easier one to go to, because the reality is that what that actually creates is a space where the reality of fighting, the reality of power, it still exists, but we're not having and engaging on the realities of what that means. And so there is a very important role for us to play, and you spoke about interpretation, around thinking about the words, not avoiding them, but finding ways to interpret them so that they are relevant for what we want to talk about. And I think that's also very important when we speak about power, for example. I think that to say that women do not, or women should not be speaking, or we shouldn't even in this space be speaking about power because that's not the point of it, I think is a big mistake. I think the reality is that we are talking about power. We are talking about the people who hold it and the people who make decisions with it, and how those people are excluding women primarily because they do not hold that specific type of power. So it's vital for us to not avoid the realities, right? Because that's actually how we step into changing things. That's actually how we start to address them. I also just want to focus a little bit on what I feel is this benevolent sexism that's coming up in some of the rhetoric that we use. And I want us to be very specific about how sexism exists within the world and how it exists within our religions. There's this idea that women are weak, women are vulnerable, and women are unable, therefore, to protect themselves. So then we will keep them out of conversations that have to do, for example, firearms, right, and picking up the gun. And what that does is, even if there is a modicum of truth to it, what it does is then it translates into other spaces where we say women are weaker, where we say women are emotional, where we say women can't be necessarily trusted within this space and we have to protect them, as a way of saying we're caring for them, but actually what we're doing is excluding them. And what we're doing is that we are entrenching that exclusion across the board. And so I think that within the way we speak to, number one, and speak about our religions, is to be careful of how we interpret the value of women and how we interpret what and who they are, right? That we are not centering them as weak citizens who need so much protection, whereas they are actually at the front lines of violence every single day. And then secondly, that within the way that we talk about women and their inclusion, we are holding each other accountable, and we're holding bodies, these bodies that we talk about, accountable when it comes to bringing women into the room, when it comes to ensuring that they have the skills within that space and that their skills are elevated. I will use an example within the Charter for Compassion. The Charter for Compassion is led by women, 2 brilliant women. They, within the Charter, are also grooming young women to lead the organization. And so it's not this idea of we want a black face and a white face and they must be female. It's this idea that we are intentional. We know that these women can lead. We're going to bring them into the spaces to lead. Secondly, the men in the room will legitimize that power, because that too needs to be done. Men need to cede that power. They do need to say that these are the women in our organization and we trust them. And so we will give them every single resource, even the resources that would benefit us, every single available form of access. We will give it to them so that they are able to lead at the level that we believe that they should. So it requires a ceding of power. It requires men to recognize that they hold that power, and it requires us to be very, very considerate of the language that we use and make sure that it is centering women as fully worthy of leadership and fully worthy of sitting in spaces where peace is being brokered, peace is being discussed, even in situations where it's violence that is taking place, because actually this pretense that we have of protecting women from violence is just, it's not true. So we must hold ourselves accountable in those ways, I think.
We've heard quite a few similar themes here today, and I think some of the things I've just taken away is power. Maybe I was reacting in a way that just maybe I was in a faith-based situation, so I wanted the faith to come through more than some of the multilateral power. But we will, respect that and know that women have to be there in whatever way we want to call that. I do think we've heard that women have to have the skills. So and that's true in all things. I remember Rwanda with all the women in the parliament because of the genocide, but they were having a tough time, and they needed basic training to be parliamentarians and do the finances. You can't put people in positions just because they're women. They have to have the right education in that space to stand up there, to bring in those other ideas in the community. To men and male champions, we do need men to be at the table to legitimize that and be partners. It is the unity that the faith brings, and it's the unity of humanity. So trying to bring that religious aspect into it again, and you don't have that in politics. You may say, oh yes, we need 50% quota. I was in the 50% quota government side here. So I'm learning to use the faith-based language for humanity. To me, that's what's coming out of this IF20 that can influence the G20 in a different way. So we have time for one or two questions, but please, your name and then the question. No comment.
So I promised the woman in the check, yes, please introduce yourself, and then behind you there's someone, and then on the other side, okay, then I'm going to take the woman in front. Sorry, 3 quick, punchy. We want to give enough time for the panel to close out as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't know if I'm going to be quick or punchy. Quick, maybe not punchy.
Oh, I'm using violent language, sorry.
Although I do like the idea of punchy. My name is Fatima Swartz, and I work for an organization called the Institute for the Healing of Memories. And I think key to that organization is what everybody has been talking about, the woundedness of the nature of being human and living in this world that is so violent. Just to say that if I was not here today, I would be standing at St. George's Cathedral on the steps where a whole range of people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, non-believers, would be talking about peace and justice and standing in solidarity with Palestine. And I think there's lots of initiatives all over the place where different religions is coming together, including Jews and Muslims and Christians, which are addressing the issues of peace and justice around this. And that has been very encouraging for me. So just to put that out there. My question is about, in the work that we do, is about doing healing journeys with people, obviously from different cultures, religious backgrounds, class, etc. And the one thing that has emerged in many of these things when people share their stories is about how women are complicit in maintaining certain structures that are destructive to fellow women. And the importance of public education around that, in how we ourselves are entrenching, even within the space here, certain notions of how we oppress other women. I mean, we just had Women's Day, and so you get invited to a party, what do you call those silly parties, where they do nails and all of that kind of things, and then
pamper parties, they call them pamper parties, yes.
Yeah, pamper parties, And so while women are being celebrated in the pamper party, who is there busy doing the work, you know? So just this contradiction between the relationship in terms of class, of how we treat people working within our houses, etc. and so on, and that we need to be much more intentional in addressing these complicities of women in this situation. The second thing is that when we share our stories, and we work in Malawi and we work with the sisters and so on, has been, again, women complicity, but also the notion, and it's coming out more, that the role of justice within the healing journey. You know, you can't heal without addressing the injustices, and that in the spaces where we share stories and we listen to each stories, there's a tendency to not want to acknowledge that the pain of the oppressor cannot be morally equivalent to the pain of the oppressed, you know, and that the oppressed, while we recognize the pain and we validate it, must be held accountable. You know, so those things in building communities, and how do we see us doing that in a way which does not reinforce hatred or pain or create more damage, because women has in many ways been the holders of that kind of compassion and empathy, as has been spoken about already. So how do we do that? And then just in terms of when we talk about the space that women occupy, and I think it's already been mentioned, that we all know there's been women leaders who has been a disaster, you know? The Margaret Thatchers of this world, the Clintons of this world, that the consciousness with which women come into space is important, right? Because otherwise we are just perpetuating systems that is not to the benefit of humanity at all. And in the second way, how do we then intentionally through public education programs or whatever, create that shift in understanding of a different kind of world that we want to live in?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fatima.
Hi, my name is Shimona. I'm from the Baha'i International Community Office in Addis Ababa, and I'll be very, very quick. So for long-lasting and sustainable peace processes, I truly believe it requires the full equality between women and men. And for that to happen, there has to be an effect in the change of culture. And we know that attitudes and beliefs are cultivated first in the family unit. So my question, and I know we don't have enough time, maybe it's something we can also explore during break, but how can the family unit be strengthened? And I think it's a responsibility of not just individuals, but also institutions. So how can we move away from domination and abuse and competition to maybe a new way of living where collaboration and cooperation are cultivated in the family unit? And because of that cultivation of constructive abilities and attitudes, we hopefully will see more change at different levels of society.
No, for one more question, and it was the woman in front over here, right? Come. No. Sorry. We can only take one more, and then we're going to do closing comments, and then I want you to please just stay for a new sacred ritual that we're going to conduct together, if you will. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Khadija Patel Ali. I serve as the HOD of the Muslim Judicial Council Women's Forum. I was also the first woman elected onto a male ulama body. You know, the ulama fraternity is completely, and definitely not as window dressing. I can promise that one. My question is simple. Women are more than half of the world's population, and we give birth to the other half. Our role is indelible and powerful. I want to ask, because I know conferences are top-down approaches, just bottom-up approaches. The chains on the brain of our sisterhood is something that has to be vigorously addressed, because it is in those, and I'm leading on the question that my sister at the back spoke about, getting the monomer, the building block of society, families, getting them activated means activating the guide, the you know, really the first university, the first school of society of nations rests there. So how do we shift the shackles on the brains of our sisterhood across the globe?
Thank you so much, Khadija. Thank you. So, thank you. Yes, you may applaud. I always hear the hesitant first applauder, and I like that. So what we're going to do is give you an opportunity to close. You make your closing comments. We know that you won't be able to answer everything that's been asked, but if you can, in your closing comment, bring in some of what was, what was just said. Thank you so much.
I think the value of spaces like these, and I think you very much highlighted that there's a top-down approach, which makes it difficult to feel like there's any real change that can take place. I think the value of spaces like this is that it entrenches, at least within the people in this room, the capacity and the capability to understand that we all see it, we all know it, and that in many different ways we are working together to change it. So there is a strong ability to recognize that solidarity is taking place. And I think what that does is that it gives us more energy and passion to continue the work that we're doing. Because within our silos, we can give up very easily. The question around the family unit is such a difficult one for me personally. And it's a difficult one because I'm reading both religion and culture within the history that we exist in, and I think particularly in this country, that has a colonial history that broke up the family unit for many families of color within this country. And so when we talk about restoring the family unit, I think there's such a deep responsibility and accountability, and maybe we go back to that idea of justice that has not really taken place at different levels within our system that can really help us have that conversation honestly. And so I feel like it's multi-layered. But what I will say is that when we talk about beliefs and when we talk specifically about how we think through justice within our belief systems, there is a beautiful word in one of the native languages in South Africa, and it's ubulungisa. And it is the word that when you translate into English means justice. But actually, if you break it down, ubulungisa is the idea of repair. So it acknowledges that there is not this one moment of saying, sorry, let's move on. But it's an understanding that there are acknowledgements that need to be made, that within the wounding there is a process of healing, that there is some form of medicine, whether that is spiritual medicine, whether that is legal medicine, whatever it is, that needs to be applied in order to heal this wound. But in essence, it's an idea of wounding. And I think when we talk about our faiths and the responsibility of our religious leaders, the responsibility of our religious houses, more than anything, we need to incorporate an ethic of justice, an ethic of repair, and that sees women, that sees young children, that sees the most vulnerable within our society, having given the opportunity to be repaired. It also means giving men the opportunity to be repaired in their belief systems and in the way that they're showing up in the world. So for me, what this conversation is about more than anything is about how we repair a system within our communities that is seated upon faiths and beliefs that wound us as a community. And that is a responsibility that each and every single one of us have to contribute to. But it requires more from those who have power. It requires more from men. And it also requires us to take some deep reflection on our own role in the wounding and the healing process that needs to take place within our country and our space. Thanks.
Thank you. So I want to start by just echoing what you said about solidarity, but also this. I think oftentimes when we speak about community, we localize it, but in these conversations, you can see how we too form a community, and you have these top-down processes, but you have these moments of connection as well, and these communities of belonging, I think, do sustain people when they leave. The other thing I think that came up that was really important was this question of family. I don't know if it's too close. This is a struggle I have as an individual, and I think this is a struggle that we have at Mujadilah as well. Is how do we balance like the very... There we go. Is this better? Okay. How do we balance a conversation around the very biological nature of women's role in the family unit and in society, and then all of these additional roles that women are now taking on? And I think we have to acknowledge the fact that women still bear children. Women still have to rest and recover from that. Women still go through things like perimenopause and menopause. I'm watching my sister go through menopause. My mother is going through, she finished going through menopause. She's going through breast cancer right now. Like there's all of these things that women's bodies go through. And we have to, I think, take seriously the fact that as we fight for equality, as we fight for women's seats at the table, as we fight for women having these increased roles, we also have to acknowledge that there are still other roles that they have to function in order for humanity to survive. And how do we do that? And how do we make women acknowledge the sacredness of those roles, and also men acknowledge the sacredness of those roles without seeing them as being weak? Yeah. And I think a lot of times this question of like women's weakness and their emotional vulnerability and, you know, their inability to fight and all of these things comes from the fact that biologically women are playing a different role in society than maybe necessarily going out and shooting guns. And so how do we hold space for those conversations and come up with a new language for them in a way that I said, like as I mentioned, understands and values their sacredness and sees them as strength and not as weakness. You know, for me, I'll always go back to education. One of the things that we do is, you know, we have an entire series of courses that we run at Mujadilah on transitions in womanhood. And we try to focus on what is the transition that a woman is going through in puberty. And then what is the transition she's going through potentially if she's getting married? What is the transition she's going through if she's choosing not to get married? What is the transition she's going through if she's having a child? And then if she's raising that child, and if that child is then leaving the house, and if that child potentially passes away, or there's conflict, or there's displacement, and then when she can't have children anymore, and then when there's no children in the house. And all of these different phases, what the woman is going through emotionally is so different and so varied. And unless you have a space for women to have those conversations alongside all of the conversations about the shifting roles, then I think we fundamentally miss a piece of the puzzle. And we don't want to get to a place where we've given women all the tools and all the education, all the resources to go out there and be amazing in community and society, but then you've created this big issue in family. And so I don't genuinely know what the balance is, but I have seen that creating spaces for educational programs like this and making sure men are present in those programs as well. Because I can tell you from firsthand experience from my brother and father, most men have no idea about what women are going through just in terms of the physicality of their development. This is happening, right? That higher. No matter how much our roles change in society, there are certain biological realities that we have to contend with. And so I think it's important just to put that out there and also see how can we hold space for that, because if we lose that and we lose a conversation about the family, then I think we're creating another problem while we're trying to solve another one.
Because we mentioned family, also I want to share that part of what we're working on are family laws, because in our context, family laws are not civil laws. their religious laws. In my country, for example, we have 15 different codes of like religious laws and 15 different courts for Christians and Muslims from different denominations, and all of them, Christian and Muslim, are detrimental to women. So this is, I mean, this is a lot of work that we need to do, and we've discovered that it is not only about gender roles, but sometimes also it's as if it's about gendering values. So we give the women custody because it's her role, or the value that she has is like to bring up the children, but we keep the decision making, so guardianship and trusteeship, with regards to money issues and to decisions, in the hands of men, whether it's the father or if the father has passed away, to men of his family. So still, and these things also have informed civil laws, and so there is a lot of work also on laws concerning family laws and others, I just want to add something else connected to what I was saying earlier, and to our sister who asked a question about what can we do today, about also to say that in my organization we also work for what we call spiritual solidarity or intercommunal solidarity, and we give a yearly award for spiritual solidarity. And because for us it's a mark of our humanity if we are able to defend the rights of others. So I definitely, as I'm wearing today the symbol of the kafir, I would have worn a Jewish symbol during the Second World War, and fighting for, standing with persons who are being persecuted from any religion or from any ethnicity is my duty. And maybe today I realize how I was slacking on this duty earlier. But I think what is happening today has awakened a lot of us on our duty to stand for all the oppressed people and just causes wherever they are. So just to say that I think only this can save our humanity.
Thank you. Let's use this one.
I think all of us, men and women, we have a role to play to a better society. As Catholic sisters in Malawi, Zambia, and Kenya, we have been doing early childhood development, training the sisters to work with the families to take care of the first 1,000 days. And we, as women, we have the spirit that when nature, we care. It's our responsibility now, so that at least we are able to dismantle these injustices and whatever, so that the children that we are having, we can give them good values and good traditions. And the boys should know that the gun is not the solution. And they will learn to say no to this kind of injustices, and also to this kind of things that we all know that does not contribute to peace, so that we are able to stop this kind of generation. We have contributed to where we are, but we shouldn't allow the next generation to sit over here to discuss about the same things. They may have their own challenges, yes, but this you have to stop.
So in my closing, I just want to come back to the question about the Jewish-Muslim dialogue, particularly in Cape Town. So I'm also with Babalwa, working with the Cape Town Interfaith Initiative, and we have a schools program that brings Jewish, Muslim, and Christian and all kind of school learners together. And that schools program has really felt the brunt of what has been happening in Gaza and the challenges of dialogue that you're referring to. And while I think we absolutely need to keep our focus on ending the violence and devastation in Palestine, there is work that we can do here. And I want to put the invitation, because I just think it's such an opportunity that we've got women from the MJC and from the SA Jewish Board of Deputies in the same room. Maybe it's a dialogue with the women in our organizations that we can have together that will start to shift things in Cape Town. So I end with that invitation.
Oh dear. I'm not going to live this. Language. So just quick on language. Fight or don't fight. Are we fighting a who or are we fighting a what? Right? Are we fighting the oppressor or are we fighting oppression? Right? Conflict transformation is really about finding power with, not over, to change the problem, which is not the sinner, it's the sin, if I can use the Christian language, right? And I find myself very easily drifting into hating the sinner and need to come back very often to trying to recorrect that. And so the last word that I'll put out is love. What does it mean to love your enemy? It is not a passive thing where you say, oh gosh, terrible, love you in the abstract, but still want you to burn in hell, if I may use that language. No, it means to want, well, I have kids, what do I want for my kids? I love them so desperately, I want them to be okay. I want them to be whole and healed. These are divine qualities. What do I want for the person, put in your politician or your whomever in the blank, who is doing horrible things in the world through their own pain and vitriol and hatred and poison? I'd like to see them feel less pain and poison, because guess what? They will then do better things in the world. How do I contribute to that? That is to love. So I personally struggle all the time to recorrect, reboot my own poison and pain into love of the enemy. It's very hard. But I would encourage you to encourage me to continue to try.
If you would mind not going yet. So one person, in spaces that I work, we don't like one person to have the last word, not because it's you, James, not at all, right? But we should all have the last word, because we want to say thank you for your energy, for your engagement, for being here with us. And I thought that something that would be really appropriate, because South African women, I mean, you're on our home turf, and we are in the month, August, Women's Month, and they really want to give us pink goodie bags and send us to the spa to keep us calm, you know? To make sure, you know, just make sure that we're okay. Give us some chocolates here and there. I don't know how many things. It's the pampering platitudes. You know, thank you for being so amazed. I don't know how many times this month we've been told we're amazing with this. It's, no. I'm a revolutionary. I'm resisting. I want to fight. No. But we're running a small campaign, but the campaign has nothing to do with it. And it's one word, right? And it's taking the rallying cry. The anti-apartheid rallying cry was Amandla, right? And Amandla is power to the people. And what we use what we're trying to do, we're trying to move away from the pampering of Women's Month, because we want power. You know, I don't want to feel safe, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make us feel safe. I want to feel free. And in order to be free, I need power, I need justice. And so our rallying cry that we're using at UWC and we're using in the space of the Tutu Center is Womandla, right? Womandla. So, yeah, Amandla, it's Womandla. So I'm going to ask you to stand up with me. Womanda is power. Yeah, power to women, right? And to all marginalized people, right? Because it's whatever interpretation is everything. So if you can let's try and make an energetic circle, because this doesn't work. So just spread yourselves a little. Sister Khadija, do you need help? Okay, fantastic. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Just where you are. I didn't ask permission from the organizers for this. I don't ask permission or forgiveness. So I take full responsibility. Just blame me if we get called out for being rowdy. Oh, I love that. Hands are being joined. This is wonderful. Let's bring Sister Khadija. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to start this softly, right? So I'm going to point to you. You can hold hands there. I'm going to point to you. Don't be shy. The word is, say it together now, Womandla. Okay. So I'm going to choose one person to say it. I'm going to point to you, you're going to say it, and the rest of you, you're going to join, right? We're going to go, do you know Miss Rachel from, Miss Rachel, she's one of our, anyways, we're going to go softly, right? It's going to do it, I think she says in piano, right? In music. And then we're going to go to forte, we're going to go louder. So we're going to do it softly, softly. Okay. I'm going to start with you.
Womandla.
Nice, there we go. Say it again.
Womandla.
You hear that? The inflection? Yeah, come on, bring it in, bring it in. There we go. No, come on. There we go. Sister in the green. Yes. Everybody, sister in the white. Yes. Let go of it with your hands and bring your fist up. Okay. Let's go. Sister, all your energy. No, sister, more energy. First the sister, then you all join. Match your energy. Come on. More. Everybody. Thank you. All had the last word.